I wrote this book tag for my friend Rachel Troyer, who blogs at stripedpineapple.com. And then my friend Esther Swartzendruber did it on her blog. And so now I feel like I want to do it on my blog, even though I wrote it. So I'm going to do it via video, and then I can actually show you the books. That seems like a fun idea. So let us get started. The first question I asked myself is, what's the last book that made you cry? Interestingly enough, I almost never cry while reading books. I cry over a lot of stupid stuff, but not books. However, once I did, and that was The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. I have some more opinions on this book, but I think that will have to wait until later in the tag when this book, interestingly enough, comes up again. Question number 2. What's the last book that made you laugh out loud in public? Okay, I'm sorry. It's been so long since I was in public. I have no idea. I don't know why I even wrote this question. I obviously did not write this tag with myself in mind to answer these questions. When thinking about books that made me laugh out loud, I have to think of... I just whacked myself in the chin. Okay. Just Patty by Jean Webster. This is the same author that wrote Daddy Longlegs, which is an excellent book. Just Patty is a book about a girl who's attending this all-girls boarding school, and it's one of those books that's written where each chapter is kind of its own short story. And Chapter 11, The Lemon Pie and the Monkey Wrench, is the most hilarious chapter. Like, you could probably just pick up this book and just read that chapter. It is so hilarious. I die every time I read it. So funny. Laugh out loud. Excellent. I don't think I've ever read it in public though, so that's kind of a cop-out. What's a book that people make fun of but you secretly love? I make fun of historical fiction a lot, and I make fun of romance a lot. But there is one book series that is romantic historical fiction that has so many, maybe not so many, it definitely has mockable things about it, but I still love it. That is the Mark of the Lion trilogy by Francine Rivers. The first book is this one, A Voice in the Wind. And then there's 2 others, I believe An Echo in the Darkness and As Sure as the Dawn, which are such, even those titles just sound like books I wouldn't like. But I just love them. And they have these brooding men with clenched jaws and a muscle jerks in their jaw. Or they massage their throbbing temples. Nevertheless, I adore the series. I can't help it. Question 4. What's the longest book you ever read? I believe the longest book I ever read was this one. Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, or Mr. Norrell, not sure how you pronounce that, by Susanna Clarke. And I love this book. I don't know if I should even recommend it because I don't know very many people that would love this book as much as I did, but I'll say if you love middle grade fantasy, but now you're an adult, and you wish that you could find books written for adults that had all the things you loved about middle grade fantasy in them, this is your book. It might seem daunting, and honestly, I read it for the first time on a Kindle, and so I had no idea how long it actually was, but it is so good. Question number 5. What's a genre that you love so much that you'll read even subpar books so long as they're in that genre? This one's kind of embarrassing. It is retold fairy tales. I love retold fairy tales. I have so many, like, I guess you can't really see this shelf very well in the camera, but like this one. Oh, this one is Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister. It was not a very good book. And every time I go through my book and try to Marie Kondo them, I think I should get rid of this book, but I keep it because it's a retelling of Cinderella, and I honestly kind of collect retellings of Cinderella at this point. Question number 6. What's the last book you purchased? I actually just put in a Thrift Books order. I ordered a book called Purple Cow, which is a marketing book, and then I ordered a book called Cold Comfort Farm, which my book club is reading, and then what was the last one? Hexwood by Diana Wynne Jones. Diana Wynne Jones, favorite author. Question number 7. What was your favorite book as a pre-teen? I actually am going to have several for this. I feel like these were my favorite books as a preteen. So first you have the Mandy books, which were the series about this girl that had like the perfect life. All the boys were in love with her. She was beautiful. She had pretty dresses. She was always going on adventures. Like, when I just thoroughly loved them. This one here is Adopted Jane. It's funny because I read my stories from when I was a kid, and so many of them are heavily borrowed from this book. And then another one that I heavily borrowed when writing my own stories was Mandy by Julie Edwards, otherwise known as Julie Andrews, otherwise known as Maria from The Sound of Music, which I did not realize when I read this book as a kid and loved it. But essentially, this girl, she's like an orphan or something, which of course we love orphans, and she finds this little cottage and fixes it up, which that plot line, I was going to say was kryptonite for me as a kid, but even as an adult, I love, love, love houses and fixing up houses. So, question number 8. What was your favorite book in your teens/early 20s? That one, well, okay, so first, let's see. Ella Enchanted, loved this book when I read it. But then I was at a Goodwill or something, and I found Peter Pan. You know, so many coming of age books are about falling in love or realizing that the world is a dark place, or those angles of growing up. But this one is really about the imaginary worlds that are real to you when you're a kid and how that changes when you grow up. And that was actually something I resonated with a lot more, because even now, like, I've always been someone who lived in my head. And the idea of growing up and no longer finding joy in that, or no longer being able to do that to the same extent, was really terrifying to me. So I think that's why I resonated with this book. It's written in such a fascinating way to me. I just loved the way he took ideas like that and made them like real in the book and just sort of said them very matter-of-factly. I just adore that. Question number 9. What is your current favorite book? That one stumped me for a bit. I was trying to think of what I could say besides Peter Pan, because I still, when people ask what my favorite book is, I just say Peter Pan, but it really doesn't resonate with me anymore. Like, when I'm trying to think of a book that resonates with me now, I probably would have to say I Captured the Castle by Dodie Smith, which is right here. I shouldn't pile so many books precariously during this video, because then they tumble down. This book has all the random things I love in a book. It has a glorious house. They're somewhat like fixing it up or like improving their lives. The characters are fascinating characters. The plotline is kind of unconventional. The main character is the type of person that would kind of be a side character in a normal romance, but they make her the main character, which is a fascinating twist. But I think the reason it resonates with me so much in this era of my life is because it explores unrequited love in a way that I don't know if I've ever run across in any other novel. I would love it if you guys could actually recommend to me novels that deal with unrequited love, and not in a like sad, despondent way, but in a just like, this is what we deal with in this world that we're in. Like, unrequited love happens. Like, it pretty much, most things resolve in the end of this book. Most people are kind of with the person they should be with, or if they really shouldn't be with anyone right now, they're single still, but so it's not sad. But pretty much every character in this book is in love with someone who doesn't love them back, and it's fascinating. Question number 10. Have you ever read a book so many times that you ruined your copy of it? Yes. Peter Pan, actually. Question 11. Tell a story about something interesting that happened to you in a bookstore. So these books I found once at St. Vinny's for 25 cents each, called My Book House. And there's so many like fairy tales and folklore in it. I just loved it. There's supposed to be 12 volumes. And when I was buying it, there was only like volume 1, volume 9, and volume 12 were missing from the set. So one time, I was exploring downtown Albany by myself, and I do not remember why I was doing that, because honestly I don't go to downtown Albany very often. But for some reason I was one summer afternoon, and I was walking by the courthouse, the old stone courthouse, and inside there was a bookstore. Now, this was like all very charming and everything, but when I walked inside the bookstore, there was something about that lady that owned the bookstore that I just did not like her. I don't know why I didn't like her. Like, there was something about her demeanor that just seemed very cold and uninviting and brash, and I don't think she said anything mean to me, but she would be like talking about how some people would donate books and they were just complete trash, and so she would just throw them away or something. I don't know. She just sounded like maybe not the nicest person. I started to not really be sure what to do because, first of all, I don't like spending money at the best of times. I've never enjoyed it. I get kind of anxious by the idea of spending money, especially at that time of my life because I was in college, right? And I had no money. And I was trying to not go into debt. But it's always extra awkward if you're in a really small shop, and the person who owns the shop is like there behind the counter watching you while you shop, and you know that if you don't buy anything, you're not contributing to their livelihood, and it's just awkward. It's just so awkward. And to make it even worse, this lady had been telling me about how hard it was to keep her business afloat, essentially. So I was trying to think of some trick to get out of there without buying anything that would also not be rude. So what I decided to do was ask her about, tell her, that I had these My Book House books. I had several volumes missing that I wondered if she had, and then if she had one, then that would be something I want to buy anyway. And if she didn't, then it would sort of give me a convenient excuse to not buy anything. So I asked her about it, and she went looking, and what she had was these, a different edition, a later edition that wasn't quite as cool. And she only had 3 volumes of it, and 2 of them were ones I already had, and volume 12 here was the only one that I didn't have. But again, it was a different edition. It wasn't really the one I wanted. So I was kind of dithering about what I should tell her, if I should buy volume 12, even though it was a little different. And she said, "Oh, you could just have all 3 of those books for free." And I was that completely threw me for a loop, that this lady that I did not like, that I thought was so cold and not cool, and the kind of person that would yell at you for reading in a bookstore without buying the book first, that she was just so casually "Here, have these 3 books for free." And it was kind of, I didn't, 2 of them I didn't even want, but I just gave them to my cousin. I have no idea what my cousin did with them. Maybe she gave them to Goodwill. I don't know, but they were off my hands. But I kept volume 12 because I did kind of need it in the set, but I do hope to replace it at some point. Question 12. If you could forget the entire plot of one book just so you'd have the chance to read it for the first time again, which book would you choose? Okay, that one's hard. There's so many books, but I think I'd have to go with The Blue Castle by L.M. Montgomery. Here we have that book. It is so satisfying to read this book for the first time. I'm literally holding it upside down and backwards. What the Bunny Slipper. Here we go. I've literally never ran into someone who read this book and didn't enjoy it, male or female. Although, I mean, it is more of a female ebook, but. Question number 13. Have you ever read a book all the way through thinking you loved it, but the ending just destroyed it for you? Here we return once again to The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. So if you're familiar with Edith Wharton, maybe you know that she doesn't really write happy books. I've read The House of Mirth. I read The Age of Innocence once I knew what type of writer she was, and I really enjoyed The Age of Innocence. I started reading Ethan Frome, and I hated that book. There's so many delightful things about this book. It's set in kind of turn of the century New York City high society, which is fascinating. Like, it's such a fascinating setting. And the main character, like, it's obviously going downhill for her. Like, things are getting worse and worse and worse and worse and worse in her life. But I'd never read this author before. I didn't realize she was like a tragedy writer of some sort. And so I just assumed that like the guy she was supposed to marry would reappear and everything would be fine in the end. And it wasn't until I had literally reached the end, and it was like I'd stay up for like 2 a.m. finishing this book, that I realized, no, this book is a tragedy. It does not end happily. And that is why I cried. I mean, I'm not saying like tears welled up in my eyes. I'm saying like I bawled like a baby. Ugly cry, heaving sobs, because I had grown attached to this character that I thought was going to have a happy ending, and she didn't. So I know that's a spoiler, but I don't even care, because no one should go into that book without realizing it's a tragedy. Question number 14. Do you prefer fiction or nonfiction? Why? I prefer fiction. If you haven't picked that up from this book tag, I don't know if I can help you. If I wanted real life, I have real life. I'd much rather have a made-up story, because when I read, I want to escape real life. So that's why I prefer fiction. Question number 15. What book has given you advice that still sticks with you? Now, most advice books are nonfiction books, but since I just went on that whole spiel about why I like fiction, I'm going to give a piece of advice I learned from a fiction book. And that book was The Penultimate Peril by Lemony Snicket. And this is the 12th book in the series of Unfortunate Events series, which is amazing. I love it. But again, not for everyone, so just be warned. The Penultimate Peril is the best book in the series, but you don't want to read it first because you'd be lost. And I'm just going to read a quote from this book that has stuck with me ever since. "You know about all the villainous people who are lurking in the hotel?" Klaus said, equally incredulously. "Yes," Justice Strauss said. "We observed rings on all the wooden furniture from people refusing to use coasters. Obviously, there are many villains staying in the hotel." I read that, I mean, when I was like 20, maybe. And ever since then, I've used coasters. Question number 16. Which fictional man would you most like to marry? Anyone who's read my blog knows this. It is Mr. Knightley from Emma. My heart belongs to Mr. Knightley. I mean, he's way older than the main character. I've never liked that, but his personality. Yes, please. Question number 17. Which fictional woman would you most like to be friends with? This one took me a while to decide, but I think ultimately I'm gonna go with Betsy Ray from the Betsy Tacy series. This is the only book I have in the series, and it's torn, and the cover picture is really weird. Actually, okay, let me give you a bit of a background on this series, in case you're not familiar with it. So Maud Hart Lovelace wrote She started out by writing a book series based on her own childhood called the Betsy Tacy books. And then she started a series of young adult books that were based on her life as a teenager, which are very, very good, very enjoyable. And then she has one called Betsy and the Great World, which is about Betsy traveling the world, well, obviously. And then this one here is Betsy's Wedding, which is about her life as a newlywed, which this one might actually be my favorite of the whole series because I really enjoy books about newlyweds. I just read Anne's House of Dreams for the first time. I don't know why I never read it before. Loved it. There's a book called Joy in the Morning by Betty Smith, I think. Betty Smith, yeah. It was the same lady that wrote A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, but I don't have Joy in the Morning. But it's about newlyweds. Very good. If you know of any good books about newlyweds, you should recommend them. They're very fun. But back to Betsy Ray. She just always has so much fun. And she's like smart, but also fun. You know? Question number 18. Which fictional house would you most like to live in? Ultimately, I'm going to have to go with the house in Howl's Moving Castle. The house in here is this adorable tiny cottage, but it's like through the power of magic. It's in multiple places at once. So it's in this beach town and it's in the capital city and it's also in this giant moving castle that's wandering around the waste. Delightful book. But honestly, there's so many of these books that I've talked about so much on my blog that I feel like I need to branch out and talk about more like Edith Wharton type stuff because not everyone's going to like Howl's Moving Castle as much as I adore it. Question number 19. Has anyone ever read a book over your shoulder on public transportation? This has happened to me twice. The first time it happened was when I was in New York City at the Mission Training Center, and I was reading this book. I think it was called NE3. I think it was about how to reach Muslims. And I was reading it on the subway, and afterwards my friends were like, dude, the guy beside you was totally reading over your shoulder, and he was completely engrossed in your book. I've always been amused by that story. And then the other one was actually a book I just mentioned, Betsy's Wedding. This book I read when I was riding the bus back from Eugene one day, back when I still went to college in Eugene and would ride the bus. And so I was sitting on the lower level and there was a guy that was sitting up on the upper level. And I remember being embarrassed that he could like see the cover of this book I was reading. I got off at like the bus stopped. I was, gonna get off or whatever. And he was like, what's that book you're reading? And so I was like, okay, great. Now I have to tell them. And I told him, the title and everything. And he's like, well, it was really interesting. I was reading over your shoulder the whole time. I just remember he had this green sweatshirt that was like, looked like it hadn't been washed in a while. He was probably 40 and just completely engrossed in my book. I must just look like I'm having a good time when I read. And people are like, I don't know. I don't know why this keeps happening to me. Rachel, who lives in New York City, said that no one has ever read over her shoulder on public transportation. I almost never take public transportation, but when I do, someone reads over my shoulder. I don't know. And the last question number 20 is, what books are you currently reading? I just finished The Dark Lord of Dirkholm. Another Diana Wynne Jones, huge Diana Wynne Jones fan. Not my favorite, actually, of hers. It actually took me a long time to read because I was just so frustrated with the way everything was always going wrong. So that's the one that I just finished. I have a number of them that I have bookmarks in, and I have no idea if I'm actually going to finish them. So one of them is Peter Pan that I was just talking about. I am rereading Peter Pan, or I was. I don't know if I'll finish. Okay, the other ones that I am sort of in the middle of are Anne of Ingleside by Ellen Montgomery. I have read this book before, but I just read Anne's House of Dreams for the first time, and that made me want to reread this book. But it's not nearly as good as some of the others, so I don't know. I might finish it, I might not. The Spy Wore Red is supposedly a true story, but it reads like a novel. I don't know. I don't know if I'll finish it or not. It didn't quite grip me. You know, some books grip you, some don't. This one here, Cathedrals, Castles, and Caves by Marcus Yoder, I knew would have some very interesting history in it, and so I've kept it around on my shelf, even though, I don't know. It's nonfiction. That's my problem. Okay, so here's the thing. I feel like some people read because they want to know more knowledge. And some people read just for fun. And some people read because like they're writers and they want to be better writers. And I'm a writer, so I should read to become a better writer. And I love learning things, so I should read to learn things. But ultimately, I read books because I want to have a good time, because I think the stories are fun and I want to escape real life. And I just think reading is delightful. And so books on history like Marcus Yoder's book are, I want to read them, but then like a more exciting novel comes along and I chase it, and then that one just sits on my shelf, and that just seems to be my reality. I probably will at least skim it at some point, but I don't know. And then I have my thrift books shipment coming, and I'm probably just going to jump right into those books and never finish this pile. Who knows? What is your reading strategy? Do you read more than one book at once? I feel like I try to, and then the less interesting books just kind of never quite get finished. I don't know. We'll see. So that's the end of this bookish tag. I would love it if you also either did this tag on your blog, did it on Facebook, filmed your own video. That would be so much fun. And if you want to subscribe to my channel, you can click the subscribe button, or if you're on my blog, I'll link to where you can subscribe. And thank you so much. After my last video, I gained like 100 subscribers or something really fun like that. So thank you guys so much for subscribing and for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this. All right, bye.